Welcome to the Europe Conversation, where this week my guest is Executive Director of Frontex, Hans Leitens. He says he wants to change the culture of the organisation, where saving lives at sea is a key priority. He also says if he had his way, no migrants would be returned to Libya, where they often face serious human rights abuses. Hans Leitens, Executive Director of Frontex, thank you very much for joining us on the Europe Conversation.
You're welcome.
So Frontex is 20 years coming up to this year. It was obviously created to protect the border of the European Union, but it's growing. I mean, politically speaking, Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the Commission, would like to increase the staff to around 30,000 from where we are now, which is in and around 3,000 staff.
It started actually even less ambitious than that. It started with being more of an information hub, a coordination mechanism, and it was only in 2019 when our mandate became executive. Right now we're still in the build-up, so in 27 we should have 10,000 to be deployed in 2028.
One of the things that does obviously come into your mind when you think of Frontex is pushbacks, where we've seen certain coast guards, in particular Greece has been accused of this many times. Obviously Greece is a country that has been very much heavily on the front line when it comes to migration for at least the past decade. But that people are being pushed back away from the coastline, deep into the sea, on unseaworthy vessels, where often they die. I mean, we had the case of the Adriana, where 600 people died. And you see all of those images of little children spread around the coastline dead. Can you tell us about that? Because Frontex does come under a lot of criticism for it not taking enough of its responsibility there.
Well, to start with, I think every single casualty hurts. Hurts, of course, the families, but also hurts us, because when we took up our job, we promised to serve and protect. So we're not sort of the enemy, they're not our opponents. Migration is a fact of life and we have to deal with it, we have to manage it. So that's to start with. Then secondly, I think it's important that we support the member states. Indeed, we see and we also observe ourselves that sometimes there are incidents. They're reported by us, they're investigated by the Fundamental Rights Office in most cases, but also the follow-up of these incidents are with the member states. I have to work with the fact that there is a rule of law that's functioning, because it's the Commission who needs to make sure that every member state has a rule of law that functions.
Emily O'Reilly, the former EU Ombudsman, was very critical of Frontex, or at least asked the question, is it responsible for saving lives at sea? Because actually you're taking the European Union, the Commission, into this if you abdicate your responsibility. And the Adriana was one case in point. This happens all the time.
Difficult thing is, so to start with, we are not a search and rescue agency as such. What we do is, in the course of our mandate, meaning protecting borders, if we run into something that might be a case where a ship is in distress, for example, we play our role in alarming the responsive and responsible member state or third country, depending on where it happens. That's what we did in the other case. Actually, I was myself in a monitoring room when we first spotted the ship. So I saw it myself the day before it went down, which is a terrible incident, by the way. Let me be absolutely clear about that. What we can do then is, when we had a plane, we can inform, in this case, the Greek authorities about what we see. We cannot coordinate.
Okay, well, 600 people died and it was pretty obvious that they were probably going to come into distress. I mean, obviously you did your duty and you complied, but is there something more you could have done to ensure that those lives were not ended the way they were?
I can tell you what I would like to have done, knowing what I know right now, but the question is, what did we know back then? And back then we had one drone flying, one plane flying, and we were instructed to go to another incident south of Crete. That was a real incident. So we had to move on because the overview of that incident was with the Greek authorities. So then we move on to a next incident where 80 people on board of also a ship in distress. So, okay, if I would have known before what would have happened, then I would have, I mean, we proposed to the Greek authorities to send another plane twice. We have been already clear about that from the day after the incident, that we proposed this to the Greek, and both times it was ignored by the Greek authorities. That's their decisions then.
Because I think this is a very important point, and I know that your own fundamental rights officer, Jonas Grimheden, has complained about the Greek authorities. There are many investigations regarding Greece and this illegal pushbacks, where migrants are pushed away and often, obviously, suffer.
I'm happy to focus on Greece, but let's first start with we're cooperating with 27 member states and a number of third countries. So it's the volume of things we do is much bigger than only in Greece. I would like in Greece to happen what I would like to happen in every country with whom we cooperate, that they comply with the rules, and that if there is an incident, and that can happen, that it is duly investigated, and that it has consequences.
There's also the investigation into the Syrian family of 4 who went to Greece, applied for asylum legally. Before their asylum process had been completed, they were forcibly put onto a plane. They ended up in Iraq. Of course, they couldn't go back to Syria. One of their complaints is that the Frontex guards, or the guards there, separated the parents from their children. They're trying to make Frontex accountable when it comes to human rights.
Yeah. The question actually is not so much about what we did, but about our responsibility. And that is, the question is, okay, should we rely on the decision as it is presented to us by, in this case, the Greek authorities, in case we have, let's say, are part of a chain of activities, in this case, a return activity. And our position has been in the past that we cannot, because it's a national responsibility to make that decision and also to make sure that it's been done in a proper way. What we do right now is we check the let's say the step before us. That's as far we can go. But if the judge would decide that we are fully responsible for the whole chain of events, that would make our life very difficult. But again, that's a fact of life then, and then we have to adjust our way of working to that.
In the past, Frontex has said that NGOs saving people at sea are a pull factor for migration. Do you believe that that is the case?
Well, you never heard me say that. Actually, I said in the Italian Senate the opposite. I have no proof. Actually, there is scientific proof that it's not the case. So there have been academia looking at the topic, and they proved with duly investigative studies that there's no proof that it is. And I have no proof of that either. So for me, NGOs are part of the ecosystem. I'm in touch with them. We speak. We try to understand each other's positions. We try to make sure that we don't sort of block each other's, because we all see the need to save lives at sea, for example.
But you see you see Frontex as a role in saving lives at sea. That's what you also believe.
Yeah, sure, we are. Yeah.
Because we know that Frontex obviously uses drones and planes to spot ships coming in, and often they're brought back to places like Libya, where people, and we've seen the long-standing reporting of this, people often face torture, arbitrary arrest. Can Frontex stand over that when they know that the repercussions for those people is so grave?
Let me be very clear. I wish there would have been no one returned to Libya, because I fully agree with what you just stated. There we have a professional dilemma, actually. Let me just give you an example. First of all, the Mediterranean is divided in search and rescue zones, and it's not our invention. It's UN law who sort of says, okay, who is responsible where? We do patrolling, what we call pre-frontier. That means that we fly over international waters, but it includes the search and rescue zones of, indeed, North African countries like Libya. When we spot a ship in distress, there is no doubt in my mind that the first responsibility we have is to save lives.
Okay.
And if it's in real distress, we relay a mayday call on behalf of the ship. And if it's in Libyan territory, it's the Libyans who have to take the responsibility, and they do. And I've been asked, okay, but why don't you just skip the Libyans and only inform the NGOs? But that would mean that I would play with human lives. Because if the NGOs are not available, then there's no coordination, then people might drown. And I cannot take that responsibility. So as much as I do not like people to be returned to Libya, if I have to choose, again, I'd rather save lives than not save lives.
Actually, there has been a 38% drop in crossings to the EU, which is actually comparable to the time during COVID when nobody was actually moving. What do you say is the reason for this?
In this specific case, I think it has to do, we know actually because we have proof of this, there were two ways how people moved from Tunisia to Lampedusa, for example. First way was use the ships like the Ariana, so the bigger Egyptian often fishing vessels, 500-600 people on board. And the other way was using smaller boats. And these were makeshift metal boats. They would construct them in 24 hours. They cost about $1,000 and they could take 30 people on board. The Tunisians stepped up their enforcement there. So they stopped this modus operandi. And that actually explains right now the decrease.
Because you mentioned Tunisia and Egypt, and obviously we talked about Libya before that, and the EU has done important deals with those two countries to stem the wave of migration, but would you be concerned about the human rights in those countries?
I always have my concerns, and I should take them on board, because everything we do has to be assured by, at the same time, compliance with fundamental rights and also data protection. At the same time, UNHCR is doing work in Libya right now. We are not. IOM is supporting you in the Libyan Coast Guard. So let's not do as if we are sort of a different species. We have to cooperate.
Just before I let you go, I want to ask you, are you concerned about the rightward hardline shift amongst member states when it comes to migration?
Sometimes it's perhaps tempting to sort of assume that you can be effective in border guarding without complying with fundamental rights. I think this is sort of an illusion. Actually, it's a false contradiction. I think fundamental rights is actually the basis of how we should do it, because we are Europe. We agreed to uphold fundamental rights. We put them actually in our charter. Every country who joined the Union signed by the cross to do this.
And do you think that you'll be able to make sure that that is pervasive within the organisation of Frontex, given, as you mentioned, the Frontex before you joined seemed to have, let's say, not as much regard for that?
You have to have transparency, and it's not just about the incidents. It's about recruitment. It's about being a fair organisation, being a diverse organisation, both in gender but also in nationalities. So I think it means a lot, and it's actually an attribute of culture. And as you know, culture is very difficult to change, but I think we're making steps right now. I think it will take for sure the rest of my mandate, which is another 3 years, to really change it. And it's not only depending on me, I think it's depending on all of the leadership of Frontex.
Well, Hans Leitens, Executive Director of Frontex, thank you very much for joining us on the Europe Conversation.
You're welcome.